Welcome to another deep dive. Today we'll be exploring Alan Watts' book, This Is It.
Sounds pretty zen, right?
Yeah, it really is, and it's a deep dive into this concept of cosmic consciousness, that feeling of being connected to, like, everything.
I think we've all had glimpses of that feeling, but Watts really goes deep.
He does. He calls it the this is it feeling, like right now, this
Hmm.
present moment. It's the whole point.
And he uses some amazing examples to make it come alive. Like, have you ever read about Pascal's fire experience?
Oh, yeah, where he, like, scribbled down these notes about feeling like pure joy and peace.
Yeah, an absolute certainty. Like the universe is just I-S.
And William James, the psychologist, he talked about it too.
Oh yeah, James described it as seeing the universe as a living presence, full of love. And he felt this sense of like eternal life.
It's wild, right? And then you've got these accounts from Buddhist traditions too.
Yeah, where people talk about the world becoming transparent and feeling completely at one with their own nature.
Yeah. It's like suddenly everything clicks and you're seeing reality without any filters.
But here's the thing, it's not the same for everyone, you know?
Mm-mm.
Some people, they feel like they've expanded, like they become the universe.
And others, they feel like their individual self completely disappears.
Yeah, Watts says both are totally valid ways of experiencing this state. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Which makes you wonder, like, how do we normally see the world, right? If these experiences are possible.
Well, Watts says that our everyday perceptions, they're kind of limited. They're shaped by social rules and all this stuff we've been taught to repress.
So we're like walking around with blinders on.
Pretty much, we're constantly filtering out parts of reality that don't fit in, that don't match our expectations.
It's like we're only seeing a tiny sliver of what's actually there.
Exactly. Like that line from Dostoevsky's The Possessed, where the character says that people are happy, but they don't even know it.
It's wild. Just a slight shift in perspective can totally change how we experience, well, everything.
And that's where Watts comes in. As a philosopher, he sees his job not as like trying to make people better or anything.
But more like revealing and celebrating this underlying reality.
Yeah, he calls it the eternal and purposeless background of human life.
I think it's easy to misunderstand that, though. Like, he's not saying we should just ignore suffering or pretend everything's perfect.
No, not at all. It's more about a deep acceptance of things as they are.
Including the messy parts, right?
A whole shebang.
To illustrate this, Watts shares some of his own experiences with these states of consciousness.
Like that childhood dream where he was strapped to a spinning ball, terrified. And the only way he found peace was to totally surrender.
That sounds intense.
It is. And then there's this other time when he was studying Eastern philosophy. He had this experience where his body seemed to vanish and the world became like transparent.
So those are some of the really profound examples. But he also talks about how these shifts can happen in really ordinary moments, too.
Oh yeah, like he was once asked a simple question and it triggered this whole experience.
What happened?
He suddenly saw the present moment as this eternal stream. And it was like phrases like, that art thou. They just clicked.
It's pretty amazing how those kinds of shifts can occur, isn't it? Like a sudden flash of insight and the world looks totally different.
It's powerful stuff. And here's the kicker. Watts doesn't shy away from the difficult experiences either, like feeling heavy or restricted.
That's part of IT, too.
Absolutely. It's not about chasing after only the good feelings, but accepting the whole range of experience.
Embracing the totality of it all.
Exactly. And that leads us to how Watts connects intelligence, instinct, and anxiety. It seems kind of strange at first, but he says that intelligence can actually lead to anxiety.
Really? How so?
Well, first, there's this burden of responsibility. With intelligence comes this fear that you might miss something important when making a decision.
So you end up second-guessing yourself all the time.
All the time. And then there's this sense of isolation from nature.
Because we're so busy analyzing everything with our minds.
Right. We create this separation between ourselves and the natural flow, and then we feel like we have to control everything.
I see. It's like we're trying to impose our will on the world instead of being in harmony with it.
And what's the third reason intelligence leads to anxiety?
Our awareness of time. Intelligence makes us so focused on the past and future, and we end up worrying about what might happen.
So it's like we're never fully present in the now, always caught up in our thoughts about what was or what could be.
Exactly. And if we look at the bigger picture, it's interesting how much Western civilization emphasizes intellect. It could be contributing to a lot of our anxieties.
That's a pretty thought-provoking idea.
Yeah. And this is where Eastern philosophies offer a different perspective. They often focus on finding a balance between intelligence and instinct.
So it's not about rejecting intelligence, but finding a way to integrate it with our natural instincts.
Exactly. It's like seeing them as two parts of a whole rather than opposing forces.
I like that. So how do we actually bridge this gap between intelligence and instinct?
Well, Watts suggests a pretty radical shift in perspective. He says we need to start experiencing the world in terms of relationship rather than separation. So instead of trying to control and analyze everything, it's about seeing how everything's connected,
Yeah, recognizing that even things that seem opposite actually depend on each other.
like freedom and determination. Watts says they're not mutually exclusive.
It's a tricky concept to wrap your head around, right? But Watts says it's more about a feeling than an intellectual understanding.
Like if we can really feel this interconnectedness, it could help ease all that anxiety about responsibility and control and time.
And that feeling of interconnectedness, that brings us back to cosmic consciousness.
Yeah, it's that experience of realizing we're not separate from the universe, that we're all part of this grand unfolding.
Which leads us to Zen Buddhism and how it tackles the whole issue of control.
Ah, the paradox of controlling the controller. It's like your mind trying to control your own mind.
Yeah, exactly. That never really works out too well.
It's a recipe for frustration. Zen is more about acceptance, working with your nature instead of fighting against it.
I like that. So it's not about trying to force yourself into some idealized state.
Nope, it's about recognizing who you already are.
Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Sure. Think of judo. You're not trying to overpower your opponent with brute force, right?
You use their momentum against them.
Exactly. And Zen uses these things called koans, like show me your original face.
Wow, that's a head scratcher.
Right. They're designed to shake you out of your usual way of thinking.
So you can't just think your way to an answer.
Nope. Koans are designed to break down the separation between subject and object, the thinker and the thought.
And that's where the real insight happens.
Yeah. You realize there isn't really a separate thinker from thoughts. It's all just happening.
That's pretty mind-blowing. And this is where Watts gets into the different ways Zen is showing up in the West, right?
Right. He talks about these ideas of beat Zen and square Zen, which represent two different attitudes toward this ancient practice.
What are those?
Beat Zen is all about rejecting effort and discipline and basically anything that feels constricting. It's about freedom and going against the grain.
Kind of like the rebellious teenager of the Zen world.
Exactly. And then you've got square Zen, which embraces the traditional practices and the whole lineage thing. They're all about discipline and following the established forms.
So like the rule followers.
Yeah, you could say that. And Watts says that both paths can lead to awakening, but they both have potential pitfalls too.
Like what?
Well, beat Zen can sometimes be used to justify laziness or a lack of structure, and square Zen can become too rigid and focused on external validation.
So it's about finding that balance, right, between structure and spontaneity.
Exactly. It's like that saying, the middle way.
I like that. So it's not about being one or the other, but finding that sweet spot in between.
Yep. Like those artists who use accidents in their work. Think of Mark Tobey or Gordon Onslow Ford. They embrace chance, but they also have incredible control over their craft.
So there's still skill and intention involved, even when you're working with the unexpected.
Right. And then there's John Cage's music, which can kind of blur the line between therapy and art.
So it's not always easy to tell the difference between genuine Zen expression and just like randomness.
Not always. That's where the idea of tea comes in. It's like this magical virtue.
Oh, what does that mean?
It's that intangible quality that makes a work of art truly Zen. You can sense the artist's intention and skill, even if it looks random or chaotic.
It's like there's a deeper meaning or purpose shining through.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about cosmic consciousness, the challenges of intelligence, and the different ways Zen shows up in the West. But what about the relationship between spirituality and sensuality? Can you be both spiritual and sensual at the same time?
Ooh, good question. That's something Watts tackles head on, He challenges that whole idea that spirituality means suppressing your animal side.
So he's not buying into that whole kill your ego thing.
Not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that embracing both the spiritual and the sensual can lead to greater wholeness.
It makes sense. We're not just minds, right? We're bodies, too.
Exactly. And Watts even points out the connections between mystical language and erotic imagery.
Oh, yeah, like in the Song of Songs, right?
Exactly. It's like he's saying that maybe both the materialist and the spiritual interpretations of that imagery are partially true.
It's like there's this meeting point between the physical and the spiritual.
Right. And that brings us to the final section of our deep dive, the new alchemy. This is where Watts explores consciousness-altering substances like LSD.
That's definitely a topic that gets people talking.
Oh yeah, it's controversial for sure. Some people worry that these kinds of experiences cheapen spirituality. Like it's just a chemical trick.
But Watt sees it differently.
He does. He compares using LSD to religious sacraments. Both require preparation and intention to be meaningful.
So it's not just about taking a drug and seeing what happens.
No, it's about approaching it with reverence and a clear purpose. And then he goes on to share some of his own experiences with LSD, describing the specific effects and insights he gained.
What kind of things did he experience?
Well, he talks about how colors and textures became super vivid, as if everything was illuminated from within.
That sounds pretty incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
And he also talks about seeing patterns and order in things that seemed random before. And he even experienced these double or multiple images, which suggests a shift in the way the brain processes information.
So it's like LSD was giving him access to a different way of seeing reality.
Exactly. He also talks about this feeling of becoming the sensations themselves rather than just having them. And then there was this incredible moment where he was in a garden and it transformed into this kind of love play in his perception. It encompassed this whole spectrum of love and intelligence.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah. And he emphasizes that this isn't about seeking out thrills or escaping reality, but about deepening our understanding of ourselves and the world. And of course, he acknowledges the potential risks of LSD and the need for responsible use. It's not a toy, right?
It's a powerful tool that needs to be handled with care and respect.
Right. It's about treating these experiences as opportunities for growth, not just recreation.
And this brings us back to the whole question of control and freedom.
Yeah, how do we reconcile our desire for control with the fact that life is unpredictable? How do we find that balance between structure and spontaneity? It's like Watts is saying that trying to make life predictable and safe actually robs us of freedom.
Yeah, it's like we end up trapped in this little bubble of our own making.
Exactly. And Watts reminds us that change is inevitable. Impermanence is part of the deal.
We can't control everything, no matter how hard we try.
Right, and that's okay. It's about learning to embrace uncertainty, to dance with the unknown.
There's that idea again, swinging with instead of resisting.
It's about developing an inner flexibility and resilience. Instead of clinging to fixed plans.
Like learning to surf. You can't control the waves, but you can learn to ride them.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to that core feeling of cosmic consciousness.
Yeah, feeling connected to the universe, understanding we're not these isolated little beings.
It's about surrendering to the flow, trusting that we're right where we need to be.
Even when things feel uncertain.
Especially when things feel uncertain.
It's a pretty radical shift in perspective, isn't it?
It is. Moving from a sense of separation and struggle to a feeling of belonging and acceptance.
It doesn't mean we become passive, though, right?
No, not at all. It's more that our actions come from a different place, a place of trust and interconnectedness.
It's like that Zen idea of wu wei, isn't it?
Effortless action. Yeah, exactly. It's not about doing nothing. It's about aligning yourself with the natural flow.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where effort melts away.
Exactly. Like when you're playing music or dancing and you just lose yourself in the flow.
It's a beautiful thing. And one of the most crucial things Watts points to is that there's no separate thinker from thoughts.
Ah, that's a big one. It completely changes how you see yourself and the world.
It's like realizing the screen isn't separate from the movie. There's just the experience itself.
Right. And that means we can stop getting so caught up in our thoughts. We can just let them come and go without judgment.
Like watching clouds drift by. So we've covered a lot of ground. Cosmic consciousness, the challenges of intelligence, the wisdom of Zen.
The interplay of spirituality and sensuality even. And of course, the potential of these consciousness-altering substances.
It's all pointing to this idea of a more integrated and harmonious way of being in the world.
And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Watts' work is full of these mind-expanding insights.
He really challenges us to think differently about everything, about who we are, how we experience the world, what it all means.
It's an invitation to question our assumptions and to embrace the mystery of existence.
So to wrap up, we'll leave you with this. If our everyday perception is kind of like a constructed reality, what are we missing? What aspects of the world are we filtering out?
And how might experiencing the world in terms of relationship rather than separation change how we approach life's challenges?
Those are some big questions to ponder.
They are. But the journey of exploring them, that's where the real magic happens.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Alan Watts' This Is It. Until next time, keep exploring.